Hey, what is up guys, and welcome back to Predatory Exotics. So we're moving on up again in another tank size, and the one we've got right here is a 60x45x60. This is an awesome tank for your arboreal species. So most of the species that we're going to mention today are going to be arboreal geckos, a few skinks, and then probably our arboreal frogs, so tree frogs and the such. So a lot of the stuff that we are going to be mentioning in today, we have mentioned before in a previous one in the 45x45x60, but this one is where you get to start having pairs and multiples of them. So we've been mentioning quite a lot of the different day gecko species that you can get on this tank series. We mentioned the Madagascar giant day gecko. This is obviously an ever popular pet of the larger day gecko species, as well as the Reunion Island day gecko that we mentioned previously. There's also another one we forgot to mention. The Standings day gecko is a super cool species, sort of more muted colours with some awesome pattern, and an awesome thing that we've seen in our local pet shop. So what we're actually going to be using this one for will be crested geckos. I know that there are a lot of cresty lovers out there. We're planning on keeping 2 females in here and a male in another tank, and we plan on breeding them. Some of the other ones that you can get in here are the gargoyle geckos, which are another awesome one. Definitely more of like a different colour pattern to your crested gecko, but definitely similar in behaviour. Then you've also got your big chunky boys, the lychee geckos. Of course you can keep inside this tank, which is the first time you can actually keep lychee geckos. Some of the other ones you can keep younger variations, but this is fully grown, they'll live nicely in here. Then of course you've also got your Chihuahua geckos, also known as the mossy geckos, which would be an awesome addition to this one, and definitely one that was like kind of a top contender for this or the crested geckos. Some of your cheaper, larger arboreal species that aren't necessarily handleable would be your tokay gecko. Obviously the males of this species are going to get really large and potentially be aggressive, so not really a great handleable species. But those bright blue and orange spots are super cool and a really nice display species. Also you've got the golden gecko. These are quite a plain gecko but a nice colour nonetheless, as well as the skunk line gecko. These are also again notorious for being quite aggressive, but that black or brown colour with the white stripes is a really pretty gecko. Then you've got stuff like your Wahlberg's velvet gecko, and one of my personal favourites, the leaf-tail gecko. Now these guys are going to get quite big, so you can keep the medium to small sized ones in here, but you might have to upgrade to a 90 in the future. And the one that I can't pronounce, the Cryptodactylus irangiensis. We've mentioned the Cryptodactylus genus on here before, some of the smaller ones, but the irangiensis species is quite a large one, so it's the first time you can get it in a tank, and it'd be perfect in this 60/60. So moving on from your geckos onto some other species, you can get the emerald swifts in here, which would be an awesome one with their scales. I think they look super cool. But then also you can keep stuff like your pygmy chameleons. Now, known as kind of one of the more difficult species of chameleon to keep, because of course they aren't the most hardy. So you're going to have to try and get that colony going, and they don't live too long. So you gotta keep that process going. But once you get them going, an awesome little species to keep inside this tank. And if you didn't want to keep a sort of more delicate chameleon species, this is okay for your baby chameleons. So your baby veileds, baby Jacksons, or even the baby panther chameleons, you could keep them in here. Obviously they are going to get a lot larger. You're going to want to upgrade it to a 90 tool once they're adult size. But while they're sort of small or juvenile, they go great inside this enclosure. Now moving on, a couple of the skink species you can keep in here. You've got the bronze skink and the long-tailed grass skink, which would be a couple of awesome additions to this, as well as the emerald tree skink as well. So moving on from lizards to some of the snake species you can keep, it's great for arboreal species. So the smooth green snake is a really active species that eats insects rather than rodents. So you are going to have to provide a UVB light across the top of the enclosure, and a bioactive setup would be great. So a couple of the other snake species that you can keep in here, definitely more of kind of your display species, are the green tree python and the emerald tree boa. Now these are 2 species that will coil up, so you're going to want to have branches going from left to right, right to left on this, and they will just sit and just looking from the pictures, they're such a nice display animal to have out. Not your typical snake, kind of ones that, you know, will wrap around the branches and just kind of sit there. Now, moving on from your reptiles to your amphibian species, we mentioned at the start this is great for your arboreal tree frogs. So some of the more common ones would be your white tree frog from Australia, also known as the dumpy frog. You can also get the white-lipped tree frog, which is an interesting species, as well as the European green tree frog. So these 3 are great species, but something a little bit different for us here in the UK would be the American grey tree frog.
These have that grey marbled appearance as well as that sort of green spotting on some of them. A really interesting species that you could get sort of 3 or 4 inside this enclosure.
Some of the other frog species that you can get in here are the milk frogs. And then another one of my personal favourites, and one we do plan on getting, not putting it in this size tank, putting it in a smaller one, but you can definitely get more in here, would be your red-eyed tree frogs. And then an actual awesome species that I recently learned about and have started to love is the tiger-legged monkey frog. These guys are awesome. Just look at their legs. They look so cool, and I can't wait to hopefully keep them someday in the future.
So if you wanted a really unique species, the waxy monkey frogs are really interesting. They get really large and have a thick skin that has a wax coating on it. This means they actively bask under quite high temperatures for an amphibian, something that would go great inside your collection and a really interesting talking point. And if you wanted something a little bit more expensive, the fringed leaf frogs are super cool with that amazing silhouette. They're an awesome species that we'd like to keep in the future.
Then you've got stuff like your barking tree frogs as well, which are a cool species. But one of the next ones I prefer is the mossy tree frogs. These guys are one of my personal favourites. And we were lucky enough to actually see a collection of this. We saw it at London Zoo, and they had such an awesome enclosure. The way that they blended into their enclosure was awesome. So don't forget, you can go check over on that video as well to go see what their enclosure looked like, because it was a really cool closure.
So a frog with a really awesome colour would be the golden tree frog. They have this golden bronze appearance that makes them stand out against the green of your bioactive enclosure. And a super funky species would be the cascaded tree frog. They've almost got that duckbill appearance and a super cool species, and something that will go great inside this 60x60 enclosure.
Now, of course, there is obviously other species that you can keep in here. We don't mention everything. And of course, all the ones that we previously mentioned, you can keep multiples of them in here. You know, it's kind of just upgrading. You can get more, but we kind of wanted to mention some of the top picks here at Predator Exotics, and some of the ones that now you can actually start keeping, like the leeches, and some of the bigger animals like that. And we can't wait to move up to even bigger tanks soon, and definitely getting into the much larger reptiles that you can keep.
So if you have enjoyed this video, please leave a like. And if you keep this enclosure or have an empty one and you want to keep something in this enclosure, let us know in the comments down below what you do keep or you want to keep inside this enclosure.
But we hope you guys have enjoyed. Don't forget to check us out on Instagram as well for all of our behind the scenes. But without further ado, we hope you guys have enjoyed, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Bye guys.